Hello, grade 6. Okay. No, sorry. Grade 7. Hello. This is chapter 1A, integers and decimals. So today we're going to go ahead and work on number 1, comparing the size of negative decimals, number 2, ordering positive and negative decimals, and then number 3, adding and subtracting integers. The key words you need to know for this chapter is negative for negative numbers or negative integers, meaning any numbers that are below 0. Positive numbers, positive integers, meaning any numbers that are above 0. A decimal. So decimals basically are the same as fractions and percents. They represent a fraction of an amount, but it's just written with a dot in the number. So for example, 1.3, 2.4. An integer is any number that is positive and negative. And place value is knowing the value of a number in its place. So for example, if I gave you the number 2.456, the 2 is in the ones place, the 4 is in the tenths with th place, the 5 is in the hundredths place, as in hundredths with a th at the end of it, and the 6 is in the thousands place, as in a thousands with a th at the end of it, and so forth. So the first skill we're going to work on is comparing the size of negative decimals. You need to, in each of these 6 problems, decide which number is much larger. So at this point, pause the video and take a moment to do these problems for yourself. And then when you're ready, just turn the video back on. If you did these problems correctly, you should have the same answers as me. In A, 45 hundredths is greater than 35 hundredths, because it's the same thing if we think of it as money, 35 cents versus 45 cents. The second one, 12 hundredths versus 3 tenths. Now, when I compare decimals, I like to make my numbers look similar in terms of the number of numbers. So if you look at 12 hundredths, there's 2 numbers behind the decimal. If you look at 3 tenths, there's only 1 number behind the decimal. So to make it more of an easier visual comparison, I'm going to add a 0 at the end of this decimal, because adding zeros at the end of the decimal really doesn't affect it. So here I am comparing 12 hundredths or 30 hundredths. Or I could just simply look at it as 12 versus 30. Which one's greater? 30 is much greater. The next one, if I follow the same idea of what I did in B by evening out the numbers, so 15 thousandths has 3 numbers behind the decimal, I'm going to make sure I do the same thing and make sure I have an extra zero behind that 12. So 1500 thousandths versus 120 thousandths, or 15 versus 120. Well, 120 is much greater, isn't it? Now, in D, E, F, we have to rely on the idea of knowing what the negative number is. So we have to think a little bit backwards. Remember, the greater the number, the hotter it is. So negative means cold and positive means hot, right? So let's think. Which temperature is hotter? That is the larger one. So in D, negative 3 degrees versus negative 6, negative 3 degrees. In E, negative 1.3, I'm going to add a 0 to that, negative 1.30, or negative 1.29. And negative 1.29 is just a tad bit warmer, just by a little bit. So do not let the numbers behind the decimal fool you. You have to take a moment just to pause and really see what's going on here. And in the last one, again, I'm going to make this an easier comparison. I'm going to rewrite it as negative 0.540. So I have 3 numbers there versus negative 0.060. So 540 versus 60, which is technically hotter. Well, negative 60, negative 540. I think it's negative 60. That sounds a lot warmer. Yeah. Skill 2, order positive negative decimals. Put these numbers in order from smallest to largest. So using some tricks to make the numbers a little more easier to compare, use those while you're ordering these numbers. Pause the video here, complete the task. When you're ready, turn it back on. So if you did this correctly, you should have negative 1.0 as in 1 whole degree cold versus 20 hundredths of a degree cold versus 15 hundredths of a degree cold, 10 hundredths of a degree cold. So it's getting warmer. So finally, the only positive number in this, or positive number in this set of series, positive 0.30. Skill 3, adding and subtracting integers. So at this time, pause the video, complete the 8 problems. When you're ready, turn it back on. So if you complete these 8 problems, you should have these answers. I'm going to go ahead and explain a little more in detail to how you come around these answers. So when we think about integers, when we're adding and subtracting integers, I like to think of keeping them as numbers with the symbols that are in front of them. So for example, if we look at A, I'm going to put a box around each number and the symbol that precedes it, that's in front of it. So here you have a 3, and it's a positive because there's no sign in front of it, and a positive 5. So if I were to think about this symbolically, a positive 3 and a positive 5, so that's 5 positives, pluses I'm drawing, that makes 8 pluses. Now in B, a negative 3 and a positive 5. So remember, one thing you need to remember is that every time you have a negative and you have a positive, that they automatically just cancel each other out and it makes 0. So for example, if I had 2 negatives and I had 3 positives, that negative and that positive cancel, negative, positive cancel, and you're left with 1 positive. So in this case, if I were to illustrate this, 3 negatives and I had 5 positives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's cancel these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Canceling out those positive negatives, you're down to a positive 2. And another way to think about this is to basically think, if they're opposite colors or opposite numbers, you're going to subtract. If they're the same color or the same symbol, you're going to most likely technically put them together. I don't like to say the word add because we're working with integers here. Instead, I'd rather say we're putting them together. Okay, so the next, I'm going to go ahead and move on to E and F for a moment. So in E, I have a positive 3, so I put it in green, and a negative 5. So again, they're opposite colors, they're opposite numbers, so technically you subtract. And another way to do it is I think of it as, okay, so 5 minus 3. So 5 minus 3 is automatically 2, right? Now, do you have more negatives or do you have more positives? In this case, we have more negatives, right? The 5 is bigger than the 3. So automatically, if you just say, pretend those symbols weren't there, and you say, oh, 5 minus 3, that leaves me with 2. Then you think, okay, was there more positive or were there more negatives? Oh, there's more negatives. Oh, automatically, that's a negative 2. That's another way to think about it. So another example is if I had, for example, 7 minus 10, right? So if I had 7 minus 10, I basically say, okay, 10 minus 7. So 10 minus 7, that's going to be 3. Now, when I look at the original problem, I had 10 negatives and 7 positives. I had more negatives, so automatically that forces this number to be a negative 3. So you have to decide, do I have more negatives or positives? That's a second approach. Okay. Now on F, let's go ahead and box the numbers. So negative 3, negative 5. Okay, so these are the same color, right? Same color means you just fuse them together. So you have 3, you got 5. Together, that's 8 negatives. And since they're negative numbers, they're both negative, you just say, oh, it's a negative 8. See, in A, you have a 3 and a 5. 3 and a 5, that's 8. Oh, they're both positive. Well, it's positive 8. Okay? Now, these remaining ones are a little more complicated because you have, if you look in the center of the numbers, there's double signs, right? Whenever we work with this, it's easier to try to simplify it into one sign. So if we recall from last year, or you should remember, that anytime you have a positive times a positive, you make a positive number. A negative times a negative also makes a positive number. A negative times a positive makes a negative number, and a negative times a positive also makes a negative number. Oh. So using this idea right here, we need to change that sign, the double signs, into just one simple sign. So I'm going to change a positive negative, that makes a negative. So I'm going to rewrite this problem here as 3 minus 5. So if we apply the same theories that we've been working with already, a negative 5 and a positive 3, oh, they're different colors. That means I got to subtract. 5 minus 3, that's 2. I have more negatives, so that's negative 2. So let's move on to the next one, a positive and negative. That's automatically a negative. So let's rewrite the problem. Negative 3 minus 5. Box the numbers, a negative 3 and a negative 5. You have a lot of negatives there. They're the same color. So that makes a negative 8. Going on to G, negative and negative, that makes a positive. So rewrite this problem. 3 plus the 5. 3 plus 5 makes 8. And then H, that double negative, turn it into a positive. So rewrite it as negative 3 plus 5. Positive 5 and negative 3, they're opposites, you subtract. 5 minus 3, that's 2. I have more positives, therefore this should be a positive 2. So that actually should be a green 2. And that is the end of our lesson.